On that note, so the whole what to do with your career when you're young. One view is if you want to be an entrepreneur, just go straight into it.
Yeah.
Well, another view is if you want to be an entrepreneur, you can learn on someone else's time. I was interviewing someone else on the pod, Dan Priestley, and his view was if you want to be an entrepreneur, learn on someone else's dime, but try and get a job in a company that has fewer than 10 people. Because if you work for a big corporate, you just learn a lot less about the whole business than you would if you're working in like a 8-man whatever team where you actually have visibility over revenues, profits, all that kind of stuff. What's your take on that?
I think I'm of two minds. One, I don't think there's only one right path. Do either. I think the smart thing, though, is if you can learn on other people's dime, that's really helpful because you'll never bankrupt yourself while working a salary, right? And so that is a really big safeguard. Because what I like to make sure people don't do is there's a lot of like hustle porn out there, right? Like sleep on your couch for 47 years and, only eat ramen noodles. And that's okay, but I'm not sure it's necessary. And I also think it's a dangerous road to think that way because, in America, for instance, people on average have less than 2 weeks of cash on hand. So if we're out there telling people all the time to go risk it all, not everybody makes it. So let's give them like a little buffer, and it's okay to have a little buffer. Don't let anybody tell you that you have to hustle and focus on the one thing and Gary V your way to success. I don't think you have to, even though I like the guy. So I think you can do either. The one thing I liked about the corporate structure is they have so much extra capital that they can spend a lot on you. In startups, me too. I have like 3 dimes to rub together.
Yep.
Like training. Or you get like when somebody asks me, do I get training if I come on board? I'm like, next company. There's no training here. We're too young. We're too small. We don't have time. It's like get in, do whatever you can do. The other thing about startups that's dangerous is they grow so fast if you're at a good one that if you are not a self-grower, you will be quickly outgrown in a startup. And so I'm sure you've experienced it too. In most of my startups, we've, 3x'd every year. And so if somebody cannot 3x themselves in a year, they can't stay in the startup because we're moving too fast. And so you have to be careful. I think if you go to a startup and you think, well, I'm just going to like learn a little bit as I go. This is like death by fire hose. And so yes, you can do the 8 to 10 company, but if you're the type of person where you need a little bit more time and you want to give yourself a bigger barrier between, your ability to have to level up immediately in a startup, then I like the corporate route. And I'm not saying it's fun. It's awful. I hated working in corporations. It's not fun. But just because it's not fun doesn't mean it's not good.
What were some of the lessons that you took away from those early days at Vanguard?
Well, Vanguard, I mean, here goes any chance they ever sponsor us as anything, but Vanguard was the worst. I hated that place. But the reason why is it just wasn't a good culture fit for me. I like meritocracies. I want to be somewhere where the cream rises to the top. If I am working harder than everybody, I can make more money, I can progress. And Vanguard's a little bit like the military. It's like every 3 years you can move, you can be an individual contributor or you can be a leader. There's not a lot of cross-pollination. They're super rigid. And so for some people, that's amazing. It was awful for me. But the lesson I learned there is there was this one time I was brand new to the job. So I was like a year in and I was right out of college. And I was killing myself for this job because I didn't know anything about finance. And so every day I went in there thinking they're going to find out that I don't know what I'm doing and then they're going to kick me out of this place. And everybody else that was part of the program had these fancy degrees. I went to a party school basically. And so I had this idea, Ali. I really believe in whatever you're bringing. You talked about the fact that you're Pakistani and a doctor and now you do this stuff online as well. You have this unique amalgamation of skills, right? That not very many other people have. And so I had that at the time in a different way. I was in finance and I also spoke Spanish and was Latino. And they were trying to break into Latin America. And I had this idea for them on how to do that. And so I went and pitched it to my boss because at the end of our rotational program, you got put in different spots. So I was trying to come up with my own job, basically, which is a great way to make more money and do what you like to do, is make your boss's job easy. Come up with a solution that you can solve. And I came up with this idea and he was like, this is actually pretty good. Let me pitch it up the ladder. So we did. They were like, great, we're going to do it. Would you be able to move to do this job? Yes, I'm in. I'm breaking my lease. I'm telling my parents. I'm doing all this stuff. 3 hours later, he calls me back to his office and he sits me down kind of like this in a little room and one of the little glass rooms. And he's like, I'm all excited. I think I'm fucking moving to Latin America. This is going to be amazing. And he's like, what do you think your peers think about you? And I was like, no idea. I thought we were talking, I don't know. What do you mean? And he's like, well, your peers think you would leave dead bodies behind you to get ahead. Oh, wow. And I was like, and I'm, 21. So I'm like trying not to cry on the, and I don't even know what emotions are going through me. And I'm like, I need you to explain a little bit more, Ron. I don't understand what you're saying. And he's like, we went to run you up the ladder and this is the feedback, from your peers. And so I was like, can you explain to me why? Like, do they mean physically? I'm kind of little. Like, I don't think I could be murdering anybody anytime soon, but okay. And he's like, well, for instance, when you're at work, you don't plan any of the lunch parties or the outings like some of the other people do. When they come to your desk, you're very focused. You're not talkative. Like, you don't help them solve their problems. And basically, that duck, how they show the duck like gliding, but underneath he's like this, that was me. And so I was just trying to keep up. But what they saw was closed, selfish, self-interested, focused, when what it really was is I was barely treading water. And that taught me that I never want to be at a place again where somebody else's perception of me could be the thing that holds me back. It had to be my performance. And he said that line to me, which is, what is that line everybody always says? It's like, perception is reality. And I remember he looked at me and said that, and I said, that's so ridiculous. It's absolutely not reality. And but that is true. And so if you're in a big corporation, perception is reality. It is politics gamified. And so you have to play the game, which is something I always was bad at doing.
So what happened next?
So then he gave the job actually to somebody. So he took my idea and he gave it to somebody else in the program, which was crippling for me at the time. And I continued to work for Vanguard, but I immediately put my resume out. I was like, nope, not doing this again. And I looked for the opposite of Vanguard, which was Goldman Sachs. It's like, where is there a place that couldn't be more of a meritocracy anywhere else in the world? And it was Goldman. And that was right pre-crisis. So I didn't know the world was about to end and I was going to go to the place that everybody hated, but that's what I ended up doing. And I did, 12 or 15 interviews to get into Goldman, and then ended up becoming one of their youngest analysts, which was cool, female analysts. And I went and moved there. The interesting part is, like, maybe 7 years or 8 years later, I ended up, the woman who took that job that I created ended up coming to work for me, was my COO at my company 2 companies ago. And then when I exited that company, she became the CEO. So yeah, so it worked out great. Yeah. And then I, and I had some like vengeful feelings for the manager for some time. But then I realized, man, the reason that I am where I am at in the world and he is where he's at in the world, which are very different places, are because of your ability to lean in and do the right thing. Like, what he should have done as a manager is like coached me through that and explained how we could get the job and figure it out, whatever. And instead he crippled to other people's pressure, which is what happens at corporations. So now he's still a middle manager at Vanguard and I'm wherever I am now. And I think that's because you have to make the hard choices. And thankfully he gave me an opportunity to do that.
One of the things that we've been talking a lot about recently internally within our team is kind of women in the workplace, and unconscious biases and all this stuff. And I recently read Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, which I thought was really good. Yeah. If someone is listening to this who either is a woman in the workplace or is working with women in the workplace, what advice would you share based on your experiences?
Well, a couple things. First and foremost, choose being the victor over being the victim always. And I've found it to be a huge benefit that I'm a woman in the workplace. Huge. Because I look different than everybody else, especially in finance. I'm much more memorable. I have a different way to engage with people. And so I liked Sheryl's book a lot too. And I like this idea of like, I don't know. What if you change the story? What if your story is not the man's out to get me and men are XYZ and we have this conflict in the workforce? What if the story is instead, I'm incredibly powerful as a woman. I look a little different than everybody else. And because of that, I'm going to have massive success. And what if all these men could be my advocates? One of my mentors told me something that I thought was kind of true. He's like, the men that work with you typically either they want to father you, they want to friend you, or they want to fuck you, right? There's like 3 types. And you got to figure out pretty quickly which one of those 3 they fall into. And then you use that to your advantage. And, you know, I did that pretty specifically. If there's a guy who wants to father you, that's amazing. That's a mentor figure, right? And you can lean into that, you know, feeling of like, oh, my daughter, or, you know, I want to help a young woman get along. Great. If they want to be friends with you, then great. You know, you work that angle. And the third are the ones you have to be careful of, but there's also power in that too. And I think a lot of people today, we want to like kill our sexuality in the workforce. And I don't really think that's necessary, actually. I think you can flirt, you know, you can use the natural chemistry that happens between men and women to your advantage. And you can do it in a way that's ethical, and you can do it in a way that's moral, and you can do it within your own personal code and the code of the company. But don't wrap up your power. I mean, I remember when I first started at Vanguard, I cut my hair really short. I have a lot of hair, so I just looked like a mushroom. You know, it's not good for anybody involved. And I barely wore any makeup, and I wore these like awful boxy suits. And I thought that I had to like become a man to get into the workforce. And it couldn't have been more opposite. You know, I could have been exactly who I wanted to be. And that probably would have been more powerful, but it was a lesson I had to learn.